We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And I'd like to say a big thank you because when I put out my gaming headset roundup, I was anticipating all the internet negativity, and instead, all the feedback I got was really very positive. So thank you to everybody who listened and wrote back and said that you enjoyed that and found it useful or agreed. Most people agreed. That's why it was positive feedback. So that was nice.
You should write it up and put it on AV Gadgets.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically there. You just have to take it from the show notes, and fill in a paragraph for each thing that summarizes your thoughts.
Sure. You could do it. So. The audio's there. You could grab it, transcribe it.
I could.
It's your website.
You know, I would be taking credit for your.
Well, just say thanks to
for your work.
Thanks to Rob H from AV Rant.
I do that at the end of a lot of articles, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, or whatever. All right. This is AV Rant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to avrant.com. Leave us a comment there. Facebook.com/avrantpodcast. YouTube.com/avrant. You can contact Rob directly. Rob at avrant.com. His Twitter is at FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is at avrant_Tom. I'm cranky today. I'm just going to let you know I'm in a bad mood.
We're called AV Rant. It's the right name for the attitude.
I know, but it's not because of that. It's somebody in my neighborhood started a huge fight on Facebook about cycling and how cyclists should be run off the road and killed. I see. So I'm still fuming about this. I didn't comment. I didn't get into it. I didn't tell him to eat a bag of what I wanted to tell him to eat a bag of, but I'm still mad.
A neighborhood Facebook cranky. Group right there.
It is. My neighborhood is the worst.
That might be the problem.
There's a lot of things. This neighborhood is full of Karens. There are so many Karens here.
Dear.
It's not. And my sister-in-law's name is Karen, and people are like, oh, you can't use Karen as whatever. She loves it. She thinks it's hilarious. Okay. Her daughter sends her Karen memes all the time, and she thinks it's fantastic. So I'm going to pull out the old white guy adage of I even know a Karen, so I can say Karen. That's not how that works, but I'm going to say it anyways. So we're going to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, if you have to support the podcast in some way, you can do that by going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation. So we want to thank Brett for doing that this week. So thank you very much, Brett.
Yeah, Brett, thank you for that PayPal donation. Really appreciate the financial support.
I want to thank our 126 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon is a service where you sign up to become a monthly subscribing member of our podcast community. Every month, they'll take a little bit of money from you, or however much you tell them to, and give most of it to us. It's a minimum of $1, so it's $12 a year for the pleasure of 2 hours a week of listening to us, or at least Rob, because he doesn't ever miss a week, but I do occasionally. Even though I was here for a hurricane.
You really haven't. In the past, it's been over a year, I think, since you've missed a single episode.
Well, I'm going to miss one in the first week of August because we're going to be on vacation. I'm not bringing my gear with us. I don't even know how we're going to bring all the stuff we need to bring, because we have to pick up my son on the way, and he's in Georgia at a Boy Scout camp. Working, so he has a literal box of stuff that he had, all tents and everything else that he's got to live with.
You could always rent a minivan. That would work.
3 kids.
Yeah.
5 people worth of stuff plus a massive box. It's just we're gonna have to take 2 cars. I think. I don't really know. But anyways.
Well, patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation, a voluntary subscription, if you'd like to think of it that way. And a big thank you to our 126 patrons over there.
Yeah. We've got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. We've got one from Jack, who's part of the 2 Hour Plus Club, and said the secret word.
Yeah.
Jay, Don, Michael, he makes sure to give us a thumb up on YouTube every Friday, thumbs up, and has shared our videos with his dad, who is also an AV enthusiast.
Nice.
Gurinder Brett, who's a member of the 2 Hour Plus Club, and also says the secret word. If you don't know what it is, you're never going to find it.
You have to go so far back in the archives, and Did you only say it in one episode? I mean, well, we mentioned it
was one episode after the credits, after the music at the end.
Yeah, and we mentioned it when people said it later for a few episodes at times. So, yes, the secret word is I have no idea how many episodes back at this point.
It's at least 100.
It's in the 500s, I think. I think it's in the 500s.
I would believe that. So, and then John. So we have Jack, Jay, Don, Michael, Gurinder, Brett, and John. So thank you very much for your notes of gratitude.
Yes, indeed. I'll say the names again. Jack, Jay, Don, Michael, and Michael's dad, too, right? So hello to Michael's dad as well. Gurinder, Brett, and John, thank you all very much for those notes of encouragement and gratitude for keeping the podcast going. A big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
Yeah. So let's get to the news here. Yeah. This is why we didn't have an opening that we usually talk about, because I would have talked about this instead. We will be talking about Black Widow. We will not be giving spoilers for those of you who haven't seen it yet. So, Marvel's Black Widow has had and I don't know how they got to this math, a $215 million opening weekend. Yeah. Now, if you look at the numbers they give you, they said it was like 80 million domestic box office, 78 million international box office, and 60 million over Disney Plus Premier Access.
Yeah.
You add those up, you do not get 215.
Okay. Everything was rounded, I guess.
I guess so. It goes to 218.
Oh, okay.
So that's what they say. They said, that's what they're saying. Oh, they're saying 215, but it was, if you added it up, it was 218. Okay. Anyways, 215 million opening weekend, but that's including the 60 million that came from Premier Access and Disney Plus. Disney is saying that the results affirms their flexible distribution strategy. So is there hope that day-and-day releases in theaters and at home might be here to stay? I wrote an article about it on AV Gadgets. Okay. It is way too early to say that, right? I think. I want to say it. I would love to say it. But there's still, we're so, especially in the USA and, I guess North America in general, we are kind of focused on, like, if it happens here, then it's everywhere. Then everybody's like us, and it's just not the case. There's many places where vaccines haven't even arrived yet, and they certainly haven't arrived in most places in any sort of meaningful way. So to think that these box office or the looking at the streaming versus box office sales is somehow going to extrapolate into the future. I just think it's way too early. And not only that, it didn't even open in China.
Right.
It hasn't even gone to China yet. So, who knows what it would have done there, because they love Marvel movies. And even though they didn't do the whole, Marvel usually tries to sneak some sort of, hey, China helped in there somewhere so that they can get a little bit more love from the Chinese audience. They didn't really do that with this movie.
At the same time, though, like in North America, if we just take the domestic box office,
right?
Throughout most of North America, theaters are back open, often with some limited seating. But
for those that didn't close permanently,
yeah, exactly,
right.
But theaters are by and large open again in the United States and Canada, and then the bulk of the Premier Access is the North American market for Disney Plus, because Disney Plus still isn't available everywhere. And then in all the places where it's available, Premier Access isn't available everywhere. So it is predominantly North American numbers for the Premier Access and the domestic box office, of course. And if you're looking at those numbers, it's like, well, clearly, first of all, Disney has never announced the number that they got from Premier Access before. So it's pretty certain everything was lower than Black Widow. That seems like a reasonable assumption. And then they were apparently proud of this number enough to actually announce it and say it publicly, how much they made from Premier Access. So, putting it all together, it's like, when you get a clear blockbuster movie, maybe had there been no pandemic and it had opened last year as was originally scheduled, it probably would have made even more. But obviously, given everything and things just being on the rebound now, it's like, you put it all together, it shows that Premier Access definitely isn't hurting them. Doesn't look to be hurting them. They still had a big box office and they still had more, and they get to keep all that Premier Access money. They're not sharing that with anybody.
Right. So the question becomes, because the naysayers are those who, are all about the, movie theaters, and I every time I read somebody say, you just can't experience this movie at home the way you can in the movie theater, I want to reach through the computer screen and just slap the stupid out of them.
I saw it in IMAX, and I watched it at home, and the home experience was superior in multiple ways. Like I'm not even talking about the people are going back out to a theater or any of that stuff. I'm just talking about the audio-visual experience. And I saw it in about the best that is available to me. I don't have Dolby Cinemas available anywhere close to me, so IMAX is the next best thing. I did like seeing the IMAX portions, the portions that were formatted in IMAX, in the actual IMAX aspect ratio, because the home release didn't switch aspect ratios. It just stayed 2.35 to 1 the entire time. So having the extra height in the sections that were actually formatted in IMAX, I did appreciate seeing that. But honestly, like, the HDR, the image on an OLED versus on a DLP IMAX digital projector, and the audio at home on my Atmos system versus the IMAX system. Like, it was better at home. It was better at home on streaming.
Yeah, so, I mean, going forward, are we going to see more movies? I expect, if I have to make a prediction, I expect that Marvel movies... that what we're going to see, at least Disney is in a really unique position where they're like, you're going to show our movies whether you want to or not, because
I mean, you basically can't afford not to if you're a theater.
Yeah. How do you feel about giving up, some of the biggest weekends you're going to have? Right. Because if it's not Star Wars and it's not, Marvel, then it's going to be a massive Pixar movie, that kids movies that make just throw money at you the entire time. You're not going to be able to say no to us. So they're in a unique position where they're going to be able to strong-arm theaters into doing whatever they want.
And then they also have the second most successful streaming service, which none of the other studios can claim that.
Right. So when we look at this, I think what we're going to see, if I have to make a prediction, is that these big blockbusters, the Marvel movies, maybe the Star Wars movies, we're going to see them day and date a lot more often than we're going to see anything else. Okay. That's what I think. I think they're going to want to, they're going to be able to say, hey, you're going to make your money from a bunch of money from this, but we're also going to put it out on streaming, and you're not going to really say boo to us about it. And then that's what I think is going to happen. Now, I mean, we'll see what happens.
The 30-day window that Warner and Paramount are putting out there, 30 to 45 day windows. I mean, that's basically what they're going for in 2022, is 30 to 45 day theatrical windows. I don't know. I mean, that seems pretty reasonable. I think that could work.
Yeah. I think Disney is just way too greedy to not have day and date releases of some of these big movies. I mean,
it all boils down to what ultimately makes them more money. What ultimately makes them more money is what they will do. But yeah, we just don't have enough data points to know yet.
This is only 2%. If you look at it, they have 100 million subscribers and they made $60 million at $30 a pop. Yeah. So that's 2 million subscribers. That's 2% of their of Disney Plus subscribers did this, which means 98% of them didn't, and either they went to the movies or they didn't go to the movies. But they didn't. So it's not like they were taking a massive amount of people away from going to the movies. They just made $60 million by pressing a button.
Yeah.
One dude goes, "Can I make it live?" Yeah. Okay. Press the button. They press the button. Like, we just made $60 million. Holla. So I know. Of course, I want this to go forward. I expect everybody who listens to this podcast wants this to go forward.
If you've got a home theater, having day and date releases at home seems like a good deal.
And at 30, especially even if it's just two of you, even if just two people, $30, you're at the very least breaking even.
And family movie where you might have wanted to watch it more than once.
Yes.
The $30 one time, and your kid can watch it as many times as they want to.
Right. Get ready to have Frozen 3 on repeat for a month.
But you can't beat the price.
Right. So, okay. All right, next news announcement. Nintendo announced the Nintendo Switch OLED model. Yes, that's the name with parentheses around the OLED model. It's not what I called it in my article. I just called it Nintendo Switch OLED because that's stupid.
The official name is OLED model with OLED model in parentheses.
It's just dumb. I have never seen a console so phoned in as this one.
A little bit.
Just like kind of feel like they put Bob on it. Like, Bob, make it a little better than it was. And Bob's like, well, I don't even know. I just got hired here. You'll be fine. So for a couple of years now, people had been predicting a Switch Pro, with the rumor reaching a fever pitch ahead of this year's E3. Funny thing is, I never heard of it. And I'm usually keeping up on gaming things.
Yeah.
this never crossed my radar, not once, about the Switch Pro, and it's probably because I could give two, what's about a Switch. I am cranky. I've almost cursed 3 times on this podcast already. With the rumor reaching a fever pitch ahead of this year's E3, Bloomberg had reported that an updated Switch was on the way. They correctly predicted the larger 7-inch versus a 6.2-inch display, and it being OLED instead of LCD, but they also predicted it would use a more powerful NVIDIA Tegra processor, one that would include NVIDIA DLSS, which is Deep Learning Super Sampling technology, to allow for 4K output to TVs when docked. But aside from the larger OLED screen, the only other upgrades are 64 gigs of internal storage instead of 32, and a much better kickstand, plus an Ethernet port built into the dock. So there's no change at all to the processor or the battery life, but the price is $50 higher, $350, and available on October 8th. I will tell you, the thing I was most excited about when I read this whole thing, when I went through the whole thing, I was like, the Ethernet port. I was like, that's the selling point. The Ethernet port is the selling point, because if not, you literally cannot plug your Switch or its dock into the internet. You have to go by Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I mean, you used to be able to do a Ethernet to USB adapter, because the fun little thing about them giving an Ethernet port in the dock is that they took away the internal USB port. There's still the external USB port, but they took away the internal one, so they swapped an internal USB for an Ethernet port instead.
That's Bob. It was his first real job there.
Yeah.
Bob didn't know what he was doing. I mean, what are you going to do? That guy He's doing his best.
I'm not impressed with it being $50 more expensive. Like, if they had simply phased out the original Switch and brought in this new one with an OLED screen at the exact same $300 price, I would have been like, okay, fine. Instead of a price drop, you went for keeping the price the same but giving us a better screen. That I would have been fine with. Charging $50 more for this? I'm like, that's... Wow, that's got some...
I don't necessarily agree with you on that one. I could see the $50 charge, but I don't necessarily think I would pay it.
Yeah.
But because they're offering all 3 of them. So they're going to have the OLED, the regular, and the light.
Yeah.
They're offering all 3. So you don't have to buy the OLED model if you don't want to.
No.
The fun thing is they released that weird... What is that weird cardboard thing they did for the Switch,
Labo.
right? The Labo stuff?
Yes, Labo.
None of that will work.
It won't work because the screen size is too big now.
Because it all goes for the screen.
And
now
the console itself on the OLED model is, I think it was like 0.45 of an inch wider. It's like it is physically a tiny bit bigger. It still uses all the same controllers and everything like that, but the actual console itself is ever so slightly wider, and that also makes it not fit into Labo stuff.
Yeah, whatever. Anyways, I'm fine with this. I think that if you want to charge $50 more and people look at the OLED, if you want to take something away from this, that if you really aren't interested in anything else about video games or Nintendo or Switches or any of that stuff, if you look at it as how did they brand this? They branded it as you should buy this for $50 more because of the OLED, and OLED is being shown as a moniker for quality or just overall being better than something else, which is not a bad thing. So,
I guess.
In my mind,
if you are predominantly going to play your Switch docked, connected to a television, there is no reason to get the OLED model, save $50 to get the original.
Yeah, and then get the USB to
Ethernet adapter.
Ethernet thing, yeah. All right, in a completely unsurprising move, NBC Universal announced that, starting in 2022, their movies will stream exclusively on their Peacock service no more than 4 months after debuting in theaters. At the moment, Universal movies go to HBO immediately after theaters, but that agreement is expiring. There's a wrinkle, however. Amazon signed an agreement so that 4 months after Universal movies show up on Peacock, Amazon Prime Video will get them for an undisclosed amount of time before they go back to being exclusive on Peacock. Now we just need Peacock to start offering 4K HDR and Atmos.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever. I don't care. Peacock is, I don't know.
They're trying. They're trying to be Disney Plus. That's what they want to be.
Yeah. We cannot have any more. Disney got in right under the radar as far as I'm concerned. They got there just before everybody else decided to jump on, so they were able to get, because I can do Netflix and I can do Disney, but I can't add any more.
Well, luckily, at that point, you probably have Amazon Prime just for Prime shipping, and that gives you Amazon Prime Video, and then now the Universal movies 8 months after theaters will be showing up on Amazon Prime. That's not so bad.
Whatever. That's not so bad. I don't care. All right, so this comes from our listener Carl. French manufacturer Revon is looking to appeal to the enthusiast disc player market that Oppo left behind. They announced their UBR X100 and X200 premium disc players quite a while ago, and now the X200 is finally available. So they announced it, and I guess they finally made it. So in North America, the Revon players are sold through Zapiti, with the X200 going for $1,700 and shipping July 23rd. They missed that one part of Oppo that we liked so much, which is they were cheap.
Well, the X100 is going to be quite a bit less expensive, although I think it's still $700 or $800. This is the one that would have gone up against the like 205 is the X200.
So its focus is on build quality, analog audio output, and universal disc playback. Oddly, though, on the video side, there's no mention of HDR10 support, so there's that.
Well, HDR10 Plus. There is HDR10, there is Dolby Vision, but not HDR10 Plus. No mention of that. Maybe it'll come via firmware update, because that's what you want.
I'm scrolling down just to see what all is in here, because these are a bunch of comments, right?
Yeah, it's a bunch.
Are we talking about my thing? Let's talk about my thing.
It's a bunch of pictures in the comments from our listeners. We can talk about your thing. I just wanted to mention with those Revon, I think it's Revon, because it's French, so neither of us is pronouncing it. Yes, exactly. But one of the things is that they are touting they will have lots and lots of information available. If you want to bring up the information about the disc you are playing, exactly what the metadata is, and that they will show it to you. That's one of the things they are touting.
For $1,700, I could buy a $200 player and pay somebody to look up stuff for me every time I'm interested in it. I could just call.
There are definitely people on AVS Forum keeping tabs of all of that stuff on every single disc.
So I don't know, $1,700 seems stupid. I'm not buying that. All right, some comments here. Let's talk about my thing. So I was watching something. What was I watching? I think it was Disney Plus.
Is it the thing you texted me about?
Yeah, the thing I texted you about.
Yeah, then it was Disney Plus.
So I was watching Disney Plus, and I noticed that it said Dolby Digital Plus, and then it said, DTSX up mixing or whatever it's called, Neural X or whatever it is.
So as far as your receiver was concerned, it was receiving a Dolby Digital Plus audio stream, and then your receiver was applying DTS Neural X up mixing to
exactly.
it. Okay.
So I went back into my settings and I said I verified it was doing pass through.
Yes.
Supposed to be doing.
So this is your Xbox Series X that you are using as your streaming player, and you have gone into the menus there and set it to Bitstream Audio Pass Through.
Right, and then under the bitstream part of it, I had it set to Neural X or DTSX. So
DTSX.
So if it doesn't, whatever, it's supposed to default to sending out.
Yeah.
If it's going to decode it itself, it's going to decode it to DTSX and send it out in that container.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be passing through bitstream. So I went back to Disney Plus and I verified that it's supposed to be an Atmos thing, because I was watching
Loki, I think you said.
I don't remember. Yeah, I think it was Loki. You're right.
Yeah.
So I was watching Loki. I was like, this is supposed to be, and it doesn't sound very good. It didn't have a lot of bass. Mm-hmm. So I went back and I turned off the the pass through thing. Pass through.
Okay.
And now it starts to come back out as DTSX or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it's been re-encoded by and now it sounds better.
Okay.
And now it has more bass.
Okay.
It sounds better. So then, because I did more testing after I talked to you, Rob, I went back. I turned pass through back on, but then changed the DTSX selection to Atmos, and now it says Atmos all the time. But it doesn't sound as good as when you turn off the pass through. You turn the pass through off, and it sounds better than if you leave the pass through on. So that was dumb. So I'm mad at it.
Yeah, one of the other things people should know about Tom's setup is that he's still using a 1080p projector. So he's not using a 4K or HDR projector. So therefore, your Xbox is set to output 1080 as far as the resolution goes, and it is set to not output HDR. It's set to output SDR.
Yes.
Because when Tom texted me about this, because I mean, we were basically just checking. This is when Black Widow had just come out, so it was kind of like, okay, is Disney Plus just getting slammed and they're like lowering the quality just because of bandwidth? What's going on? And of course, I'm in Canada, Tom's in the States, so it's not certain because they are two separate services: Disney Plus Canada, Disney Plus US. But I checked on mine, and of course, I do have a 4K and HDR display, and Atmos was working from Loki, and Atmos was working from Black Widow, and that all seemed fine, but then I forced my NVIDIA Shield to output 1080p SDR instead of 4K HDR. And when I did that, it took away Atmos. It went down to Dolby Digital plus 5.1. So I was like, I'll bet the Xbox Series X is doing the same thing, where if you're only outputting 1080 instead of 4K, it limits your audio option. But then I forced my Apple TV 4K to output 1080p standard dynamic range, and it happily kept playing Atmos at that lowered resolution. So, I mean, this is all from Disney Plus. So it seems to be, it's not like all on Disney Plus's shoulders. It is different from device to device as to what gets supported at what resolutions. And it's a wonderful jumbled mess, because then you have the wrinkle on top of it with the Xbox Series X of, you do set this default audio where everything comes out in that container, and it's really tough to tell what the original signal was because it's decoding it internally and then putting it into whatever container you choose. Now they have this pass-through option, but it doesn't work on every single app, and it seems a little bit flaky here and there. And it's like, what is doing what and when, and why is it sounding like this?
Yeah. So I was now I don't know what to set my Xbox at. Basically,
stereo.
is what it comes down to.
Stereo. Everything will work in stereo.
Oh my god! So I actually got a question from somebody on AV Gadgets. They sent it to me on Facebook, Facebook Messenger or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, I'm having a problem getting Atmos out of my Sony Ultra Blu-ray player." I'm like, okay,
that one
fine.
Should be fixable.
Well, that's what I said.
Yeah.
I'm like, he's, this, and they're connecting through. I don't remember. Anyways,
yeah.
The problem is that that was the newest thing they had, and everything else was old.
Okay.
Like super old. Like was not going to take Atmos no matter what you did.
Yeah.
Like I want to get surround out of this. I'm like, well, how you're connecting things, that's not going to work.
You can get Dolby Digital 5.1?
Yeah, maybe, but they weren't able to do it for some reason. And I was like, well, just set it to stereo and then have your receiver up next. Yeah. And I was like, they got super mad at me. I was like, okay, well, okay. I thought you wanted
still
the
getting
solution.
all the sound, but no.
It's just, there's the solution, but...
So, I mean, the thing is, the Xbox Series X is essentially a PC. I mean, it works very similarly to a PC. And we got to remember, Tom, PCs are a brand new thing. To think that they could have figured out something as complicated as audio, I mean, we got to give them a couple more decades here. Got to be fair.
Well, I mean, this is Microsoft. It's not like they've been doing this for any period, or that anybody has ever complained to them before about audio not being done correctly. DJ... If you're not blinding drunk at this point, then you are doing shots wrong, because I am
not following the rules of the drinking game.
Remember, I'm already cranky, and then this stupid Xbox won't put out audio properly. We're now on Xbox. How many Xboxes have there been? 1, 2, 3, like 7 or something? I guess if you count all the different mid-tier iterations. I mean, get the audio right. How hard is this? Bitstream out the thing I want, and then don't tell me you're bitstreaming and then downgrade it to Dolby Digital Plus and cut out all the bass. So mad. All right, let's get to some comments here. Nelson says, after years of hearing us talk about room treatments, he finally got around to making some. GIK is actually local to him, so he bought the DIY materials from them and made himself 18 2-foot by 4-foot panels. He left some of the panels at the front unwrapped since they were hidden behind the curtains on either side of his screen. And after his walls were covered about as much as he wanted, he still had 4 panels left over. So he stacked them 4 inches thick and put them in the floor to wall edges out of sight behind his back row of seats. They seem to have nicely reduced a problematic standing wave for that back row. Listening to his newly treated room, regular surround sound and Atmos in particular seem much more defined. Each individual sound and the distinct placement of each sound is easier to pick out, but also makes it apparent that not all Atmos is created equal. And some soundtracks are great, but others seem to be mostly just use the front 3 speakers and little else. It's easier to hear that difference now, though. So he likes the results, but in our experience, did he maybe overdo it? Does he have too much treatment? I'm just going to say no.
Yeah, that's a pretty flat no from me.
That sounds about... I mean, I know 18 panels sounds like a lot. They disappear into your room. They absolutely do. I'm going to look around.
And I mean, his room is not enormous, but it is not tiny by any means. And, we're aiming for around 20 to 30% of your total surface area covered in absorptive material. It looks like his floor is some kind of carpet, but it doesn't look to be super thick plush carpet. So if we're really just talking about the walls having panels on them, I don't think you've even reached 30% of total surface area, all 6 surfaces of your room, so that you have not overdone it. And ultimately, you are enjoying what it sounds like, so that tells you the whole story.
I have 11 panels in here. They're not all 2 foot by 4 foot, some of them are 2 by 2. And 6 of the tri-traps in here. And
so there you go.
Almost, I mean, there's a panel just about everywhere I can put one. So, yeah, this is fun. Oh, I think it looks good.
Yes.
I think it looks good.
Yeah.
All the different colors and stuff, which at least, makes it more interesting. Mm-hmm. So John in the Philippines is going down to only 2 subwoofers instead of 3. It turned out to be, I guess that turned out to be trickier than anticipated. When he added his pair of SVS PB1000 Pro subs to his existing PB1000, he had one in the front left corner, one in the middle of the back wall, and one in the right side wall. We said just 2 subs, one at the front, one at the back, ought to be capable of great results. We also said there's no harm in trying Odyssey Sub EQ HT and actually letting it do its setup with 2 independent subwoofer outputs. Well, he had in mind that he was going to have one sub at the front and one sub at the back, but then they both need to be right in the middle. And while he can put his center speaker on top of his front sub, it's a little too high for his screen. He tried having just 2 subs, both up front, in the corners, which is not what we said.
Definitely not.
I want to stress that would not have been something we would have said or recommended. But no matter what he did with Odyssey or his mini DSP, he couldn't get uniform results across the seats. Absolutely no surprise there. So he brought the third sub back into the setup in the middle of the back wall, and without too much effort with the mini DSP, achieved the best results yet. So maybe the third sub won't get sold off after all, and he has a 7.3.4 configuration controlled by his Denon X3700H. That means he actually needs at least 2 channels. At least 2 channels of external amplification, and he has a Macintosh MA8900 for that. He really likes their VU meters look. I was just researching those things today, so we'll talk about that in a second. And he tried comparing what it sounded like with his front, left, and right towers powered by the Macintosh versus powered by the Denon receivers built-in apps. Try as he might, he could not tell the difference in the blind comparison, but no regrets owning that Macintosh. His VU meters are very pretty. P.S. He hopes Tom enjoys the new photos, which is him wearing the helmet, or at least the helmet in every single picture, which is the way it should be.
He's got a Stormtrooper helmet.
I will say that if you...
in every picture now.
if you'd really wanted to impress me, they would have also been in the measurement graph someplace. I just want to say you would have copy pasted that thing,
right? And just to mention the graphs, if people are following along on YouTube or in the Flickr album, then he's showing us the measurements he took in June. This is at each of the 3 seats across his primary couch. This was when he had 3 subwoofers, but one was in the front left corner, one was in the middle of the back wall, and one was on the right hand wall. And it's like, okay, we said this is a pretty darn good result, but he was like, these lines don't perfectly overlap. Now he has 2 subs in the front corners, front left and right corners, and then 1 sub in the middle of the back wall. And now the lines are really close to perfectly overlapping. He's very happy with the result.
Right. And if you think, now, I'm not going to suggest this is something that we should do all the time, but if you want to think about it, you put the 2 subs in the corners up front, you essentially create a phantom sub in the middle between those 2.
Given that his room is not tremendously wide, I think he said it was only 12 or 13 feet wide. For many frequencies, many of the lowest frequencies, those are essentially co-located subs. Even though to our eye it looks like they're kind of far apart, when frequencies are 40, 50 feet long, those subs are essentially co-located.
So you create like a phantom center in the middle, and then you put a sub in the
middle of the back wall.
The problem with the other way you had it is you had one off to one side in the front, one off to an opposite side in the back, and then one on the side wall, and you were trying to make them all work.
But just to completely clarify, it seemed like, I don't know if he just didn't mention it in the email or if it didn't come through clearly in our explanation. When we were saying, because he doesn't have the rear 2 corners of his room available, So he couldn't do diagonally opposite corners, but we were saying he did have space in between, say, his front right tower and his center. So in between the center and the front right speaker, he could have put a subwoofer there. Then he could have put a subwoofer on the back wall to the left of center. So they are still diagonally across from each other. They're not all the way to diagonally opposite corners, but they're diagonally across each other in the room. He didn't try that with just 2 subwoofers. No, I don't know. Looking at the room, it doesn't look like he has room to the right of center at all. And we know that the door is sort of in the rear left corner. So maybe he just doesn't really have room anywhere along that back wall except right in the center of the back wall.
Maybe.
From the vantages we could see, it looked like he had room to the left of center on the back wall, but maybe he doesn't for some reason. We're not seeing everything. So but just wanted to clarify that 2 subs still might work if you do them diagonally across from each other, just not all the way to the corners, simply because you can't physically put them.
Right. So put the sub at the back of the room wherever you can put it. As close to a wall as you can. All right. So, so that when the door opens, you're not hitting the sub.
Sure.
Basically. And then measure that distance to the wall and then go to from the wall, it really doesn't matter. And then go to the front wall and measure that distance in from the right wall instead of the left wall, and put the second sub there, is what we're saying. And you could probably get I would say almost exactly the same results
with two subs instead of 3.
Instead of 3.
Possibly.
and
it seems like he's not opposed to trying things and measuring, so maybe that's the next thing.
All right. John, Rob mentioned in his gaming headset roundup that there are microphones you can add on to basically any headphones that you like, but Rob didn't mention any specifics. So he wanted to recommend that Antlion.
I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Antlion, maybe? I don't know.
Antlion? I don't know. I give up. ModMic options. There's also the Ablet mic attachments available for a variety of popular headphones, including the Audio-Technica and Sennheiser models we often mention. They just plug into the existing 3.5mm or 2.5mm jacks on the compatible headphones and add a mic. So that's exciting. That's a thing.
That would have been an option. I mean, as I said at the beginning of my roundup there last week, I was just thinking, hey, gaming is a huge industry now, and surely someone has a good, I was hoping wireless headset. I was hoping wireless headset that would work with both an Xbox and a PlayStation. I was like, somebody must be doing this by now. And like SteelSeries has one model that works wirelessly with both, but then it didn't sound good. So yeah. It was a bit crazy. But yes, this is an option. If you have a pair of headphones that you like, you can add a microphone to them.
Yeah, these things start at $50 though. I mean, they're not cheap.
Yeah. But that's
one of them, or 2 of them only work with the PS4 and 5. And
there's that.
Go up to $120.
Yup.
There you go. And you buy new headphones for that price. All right, some questions here. Jack got himself an Epson 5050 UB projector. He's using it with a 120-inch Seymour AV center stage UF screen. The projector about 12 feet away. He read a review over projector reviews that we recommended. He was trying to follow their recommended settings, but he got a bit lost. Other than selecting either the natural picture mode or the digital cinema picture mode within the color mode section of image menu, plus setting the lamp to high, medium, or eco within the power consumption section of the image menu, he's had some trouble figuring out exactly what all the other settings should be, and there are a lot. He's got a software engineering degree, so he thought a user menu would be easy to figure out, but not so much. It's because it's not written by humans. I'm just telling you. Humans do not write user menus.
The menu structure of the Epson projector is quite ridiculous. Why there are so many subsections after you press menu on the remote is it doesn't make sense. And yeah, once I was looking through it, like, it is that thing, I'm guilty of it. Like, I've seen it enough times that it didn't occur to me just how confusing this could be, because the settings, what Projector Reviews has done is, in order to make their settings seem legible, is they put them in tables, and the tables make sense. But all of those settings don't exist one after another in the menu structure of the Epson. You have to hunt and peck to find them. Yeah, it's clear as mud. So we'll try to help out after.
This reminds me of the good old days of Denon user manuals, where I was like, and I don't know how many times
They've gotten a lot better.
They have, but But it used to be that they would have individual people write individual sections, and they would take those sections, they would staple them together, then they would throw them up in the air, collect them into a pile and print it. That would be it. Somebody write a table of contents for this thing. We're done. All of his sources are plugged into his Rant's SR6014 receiver, so he only uses a single input on the Epson. He just needs to set up one configuration for SDR and another for HDR, correct? He found where he could set up 5 image preset modes with the image enhancement the image enhancement section of the image menu. Just going 3 or 4 deep right there. And he thought he would just start by just setting the basic black and white levels of his image, aka brightness and contrast. But even that didn't seem to work the way he thinks it should. So can we step by step this for him? Projector Reviews provides the values, but how do you actually input them into the projector?
So just to revisit, because we did talk to Chris a few weeks ago, who also had an Epson 5050 UB, and he was like, okay, which of the values that Projector Reviews listed do I plug in? Because they go into a whole advanced color management system thing, and he's like, do I put all of these into? And we're like, no. Yeah. So just to revisit that really quickly, so that people are aware, they do have these tables. They've got your basic contrast, brightness, color, tint, all those things, but then they also go into your auto iris and your gamma setting and frame interpolation and all that. And all of those initial settings are good to follow, but like I say, they don't show up in this order in one handy table inside of your Epson. So I am to blame for not making that clear. And then they have one more section, which is the RGB custom. That is the only color part that I would feel comfortable going off of Projector Reviews settings. It is just the red, green, and blue gain and offset, the 2-point white scale, which is pretty much inherent to the lamp of this projector. So that one is fine to adjust. Anything that has to do with the grayscale adjustments or the advanced color management, I wouldn't follow that at all. But getting into the Epson's menu and how to actually step-by-step this a little bit to hopefully make it so that you're not tripping up trying to find all these things.
These menus look very familiar. I have an Epson projector, and these menus look very familiar to me, so I'm a little bit more comfortable. Yeah.
But you do press
but if you look at... Yeah, but before you get into that, though, if you do look at the tables that they're provided, they have a pre-calibration and a post-calibration.
Yes.
So really, all what I would be doing if I were going to do this myself, and I had no idea, I would go into the menus of the Epson, and I would go into the first menu, which whatever that might be, and then scan the options and compare them to the tables, because most of these things are not being changed.
Most of them are not. That's right.
The contrast, brightness, color, tint, all those are staying the same. The color temp is staying the same. Skin tone is staying the same. Gamma changes slightly, but there's maybe 5 or 6 settings that you really need to actually find. So you just go through the menus one at a time, looking for those 5 or 6 things that you're going to find. And I mean, because this is not something. And I was having a conversation with my son about stuff like this the other night. There's things that you only do a handful of times in your life.
Sure.
It's not worth it to buy the tool, whatever the fancy tool is to get, the spark plug out of your car, because you're never going to do it. You don't do it. Maybe you're not that guy. Maybe you are that guy and you have that tool. But this is not something you're going to do a lot. You can do it once.
Right.
You might do it again 5 years from now, but it's not something you need to commit to memory.
And they aren't actually truly trying to hide it from you.
Right.
So if you do just literally go through every menu option one at a time, you will come across these things. But that does mean cross-referencing, going back to the Projector Reviews table. Is is this one of the settings that didn't show up in this order? Is this one of them? Yeah, it can be a headache for sure. But you do just start by pressing the menu button on the Epson's remote. That'll come up. And so you'll see this first table, which is image, signal, settings, extended network info reset. So we are going to go down those in order, and you would think everything you need to adjust as far as the picture goes would be in that first image section, but it's not. And that's why this is difficult to find. And then there's one really crazy thing about that presets that he talked about, which is bewildering why they set it up this way. But you do start in the image section, and your basic things of choosing your color mode, choosing your picture mode, that's the very first thing. He did find that. Your standard brightness, contrast, color saturation, and tint and sharpness, those are all there, so that's fine. Now, you do get to the color temp section, And in there, there's multiple things. It's a sub-menu of an already sub-menu to the image sub-menu, and you get into the color temp, and there's multiple things in there. Now, what's interesting is there you have the basic color temperature, which doesn't change from 6500 Kelvin, but that is where the skin tone and the RGB custom that I mentioned, the one set of color values that I would actually change, they're all within that color temp menu, right? So there's your RGB custom. There's your grayscale. I wouldn't touch the grayscale, but I would touch the RGB custom because that's pretty much inherent to the lamp. And those are all there inside of that color temp submenu. But you're right. If you're just following the projector reviews table, that isn't completely apparent. If you get down into the advanced, that's where you'll find your gamma section. That's where you'll find your full 6 color adjustment with that you're not going to touch. There shouldn't be any need to touch the deinterlacing setting, but you also have your lens iris. And your lens iris is the manual iris that you adjust so that if you have it set up with the projector zoomed right in and it's actually a bit too bright, you can manually close down that lens iris permanently. Like, it's not going to adjust itself. So that's in the advanced settings. Your gamma and your lens iris are in there. Your power consumption is where you set your lamp mode. He did discover that. And then there is this auto iris. There's another iris setting, but the auto iris is the one that is self-adjusting on the fly, scene by scene, to close down or open up depending on whether the scene that is being shown is dark or bright. So that can be confusing. Then what was funny is image enhancement, like reading the manual, they list image enhancement and then they're like, to find out what image enhancement is, scroll down further. For some reason, you couldn't describe it right there in the order in which it shows up. You have to scroll down further in the manual to get to the image enhancement section, and that's where you find the presets that he talked about. He's like, okay, yeah, I know this thing is supposed to have memories, so I can set up one for SDR and set that to preset 1, and set up HDR and set that to preset 2, and it should be easy to switch back and forth, right? Well, no. We'll get to where that does happen, because the Epson does have that, but these image presets are only for the image enhancement section, which is whether or not you're doing 2K to 4K, and whether or not you're applying noise reduction and all those types of things. It's only the image enhancement settings that get set to this image preset mode. That's all they do. So that's why when he was adjusting his contrast and brightness, just the basic white point and black point, and then trying to apply that to one of these image presets, it didn't remember them. Because this isn't where you do that part. This is just where you remember whether you have noise reduction on or not. It's incredibly stupid. So that's the image part, and then you get down to the signal submenu. Here you have all your 3D settings. Here you have your overscan setting, which is kind of the important one out of this signal area. Why is overscan in signal and not image? I don't know, but it is. So that's where you want to turn overscan off. That's where if you are doing 3D, you can do your 3D setup. There is a part in the advanced section of there where you can change the image processing to either fast or fine. If you're playing video games, you want to set it to fast. Why isn't that in some kind of part of the picture setup? I don't know. It's in the signal menu. That's where you'll find the game mode, essentially, by switching image processing to fast within advanced within signal. Clear as mud, but we're trying to do this sort of step-by-step in order. Finally, we get to the settings menu. This is sort of the last place where we're really going to have to adjust something. The settings submenu. And this one's kind of important because here is where you find the memories. Here is the part. First of all, I mentioned there's the user button. That's really handy if you want to set that to either info or to be able to switch between fine and fast, because maybe you want to switch in and out of game mode. And that's where you could set the user button to have that on the remote. So you press it and it just toggles, or you can set it to become the info button, because they didn't bother to put a dedicated info button on it. You have to choose it as part of the user button. But they have the memories in here. This is where you go through all of your image settings and then back out of the image menu, go down to the settings menu and go down to memory. Now, there is a dedicated memory button on the Epson remote that'll take you straight here, but this is where you make your adjustments in the natural picture mode, and that is your SDR setting, and then you make your adjustments in the digital cinema picture mode, and that becomes memory 2 for your HDR settings. Then you just press the memory button on the Epson remote, and you can toggle between those two things. So that's going in order. It is confusing needlessly. It is silly. Finally, there is the extended menu, which is the next section. And that's, I just bring it up because there you can choose whether or not the Epson goes to its home menu when you first turn it on, or whether it just goes right back to the last input it was playing, which can be a really annoying thing. You can also choose whether the little LED light is on or off in the extended part of the menu. Extended, because they couldn't fit it. Like, I guess they could have called it miscellaneous, but they put it in extended. So hopefully that's close enough to step by step to get you through it. It is stupid. I blame no one for thinking this is dumb.
Okay. If you were like me, you went and got a drink.
Sure.
While you were waiting for this to get done. Jason got himself one of those huge monolith Monoprice M-215 subs. It's 2 because there's 2 15-inch drivers.
That's right. The name makes sense.
Thank you for that, Monoprice. It's 4 feet tall, 215 pounds.
Yeah.
Okay, he's using it in a 5.1.4 configuration with a Denon X4500H. His room is a bit irregularly shaped since it's a finished attic space, so the ceiling is sloped on both sides. It makes me feel like it is a A-frame then.
Sure.
How is the basement?
No, attic.
Attic. Oh, okay. I don't know why my brain just said basement. I don't know why. All right. And the rest of the dimensions are not perfect rectangle, or not a perfect rectangle, but it's not an enormous space, and he has a door to close off this room for the rest of the house. It should be like a vault door with that sub. Blow it off the hinges. He used RoomIQ Wizard to take measurements, and down to 70 hertz, things look okay, but then he has a steep slope downward to the point that it's measuring 0 dB at 30 hertz. He's tried a few different physical locations for the sub within the room in every setting he could think of, and while those made small differences, the overall shape of his measurements and this huge drop-off in base room is very consistent. Something's got to be wrong. How can this monster sub be struggling everywhere below 70 hertz, no matter where he puts it in this room, and be literally silent at 30 hertz and below? Can we help him sort it out? This is a thing called a standing wave, and you've got it.
Oh, no. That's not a standing wave. If it was a standing wave, it wouldn't be all of the frequencies going down there.
Oh, well, I'm talking about the 30 hertz one where it's 0. Oh, wait, no, I'm looking at the graph now. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, this...
I thought he was saying he had like a suck out at 30 hertz down to 0, and then it came back.
This is a high pass filter. That you've got a high pass filter applied to here, and so I mean, literally the only thing I can think of is he's got one sub. He's plugging it into one of the jacks on the back of his Denon. The center pre-out jack is right above the subwoofer jack.
Yeah,
your center is probably set to small. I'm like, if you're saying, hey, you're saying I did something this simple and that's what's causing this, I'm like, look, we've done it, okay? There is no shame in this. I have absolutely plugged my subwoofer into the wrong input.
Yes, the output on my pre-outs before. That has absolutely happened to me, and I've been sitting there racking my brains trying to figure out what the heck's going on. It has 100% happened. You are not alone.
That is right, and I mean, all of these pre-out jacks are right together, right on top of each other, especially if like you were reaching around the back of your equipment rack or equipment stand or whatever and like feeling for it, or doing it upside down, right? You're looking over the top of it and plugging something in, from the like, it's super easy to do. It is the only thing that makes sense, because when we're seeing what this measurement is, that is clearly a high pass filter. That's so it's filtering off.
For those of you that aren't looking at the graphs, it's straight lines, straight horizontal lines to 70 hertz or so, 100 hertz basically.
Yeah.
And then about 90 hertz or so, we start to see it drop off, and then it's just like a smooth slope. Like if you were going to build a slide, this is the slope you would want for your slide. It looks exactly like a slide, and that's a 12 dB or 24 dB.
That's a 24 dB roll off on the bottom end.
That's exactly what it should look like.
And I mean, it makes sense. If you had accidentally plugged the subwoofer into the center speaker, or I mean, it might not necessarily be the center, but I'm guessing it's the center speaker one because it's right above the subwoofer one. It could be just to the left of it because that is one of the front speakers. It could be a surround.
It could be the front because they're all right there.
It could be any of them. But I genuinely believe that's what's going on, because really it's the only thing that makes sense. Like when you say, I've moved my subwoofer around the room, I've tried all the settings on the subwoofer, and all of them resulted in this exact identical slope going down, there is a filter being applied. There's no other explanation for it, and it's it's very easy to have simply plugged the subwoofer into the incorrect pre-out on the back, and I swear that's what it must be.
You know, what I was thinking was that it was more of a flat line, like he's losing a little bit of volume around 70, but then it was a flat line, and then he had a big suck out at 30.
Sure.
That can happen. That can certainly happen with a standing wave. You just get this big null in your room that, you know, that the subwoofer is so freaking huge that no matter what you do, you can keep turning it up. It's never going to make that null go away. But that is, once I saw the graph, I was like, okay, this makes a little bit more sense now. So that's why I described it to you guys, because it's not like, it's dipping. It is exactly like a child's slide. Sure. It's exactly what it looks like. So, all right, Scott and David. Scott intends to have 2 subwoofers. Right. Everyone should intend that. He is setting up a dedicated theater room that is roughly 15 by 18 feet. Aesthetically, putting 1 sub in the front left corner and the 2nd sub in the back right corner would work best. But being a dedicated room, he theoretically has no limitations on placement, despite how much we've talked about dual subwoofer placement and setup. Go ahead and drink. Someone's got to drink for this one for sure. He's still feeling unsure because there's so much written about it online. You just got to read the stuff I wrote. Go to avgadgets.com, read my stuff, because that's the stuff that's right. Everything else is wrong. Some people still insist that corner placement is bad no matter what. Those people are wrong. Some say to put the subs on opposite sides. Some say both up front. Those people are wrong. Some, not the ones that say opposite sides. Some say to make them asymmetrically placed as possible. That's also, I guess, wrong. I don't know. I mean, is mirrored asymmetrical? I don't know. Anyways. Wow. They're wrong. Everybody states their rationale, and without knowing for certain beforehand, they can all seem pretty reasonable, even though there's so much contradiction. We won't even link to it, but I sent Rob a link to an article about subwoofer placement that literally it seemed like gibberish.
Well, it contradicted itself multiple times within one article by one author.
Within sentence to sentence, we're like diametrically opposed. I'm like, and then the comments underneath were like, "Thank you for explaining this to me so clearly." I'm like, you must be a bot, because no human being could read this article and walk away from it and think, yeah, I got it now. Now I know where to put my subs. I think by the end, you should have stapled one to a ceiling, maybe. It was a little confusing. So he says, assuming he has no limitation on placement, so where would he put 2 subwoofers? And bottom line, would his front left and rear right corner placement be okay? Bottom line, if that's where you want to put them, that's absolutely great. You should put them there.
He did say the dimensions of his room made it sound like it's a rectangle, and said it's a dedicated home theater he's setting up. So if this is an enclosed rectangle, 15 by 18, then yes, diagonally opposite corners should work very nicely. Is it the absolute optimum? Theoretically, the absolute optimum would be the middles of 2 opposing walls, the middle of your front wall and the middle of the back wall, or the middle of the left wall and the middle of the right wall. And we're taking that from Todd Welty's Harmon research, where he did things both in simulation, in enclosed rectangular rooms, this is important, and then did real-world measurements to see if the simulations lined up with real-world results, and they did. So that's what we're basing most of our recommendation on. When, we're not doing trial and error, when we're basing it on, here's the room, where is the most likely places to put 2 subwoofers and get really good results, the research and the experimentation, the real-world experimentation, they jive and they say the middle of the front wall, middle of the back wall, or middle of the left wall, middle of the right wall. Those are the best positions. Diagonally opposite corners is better than just about anything else after that. It is not as good as the middle of opposing walls. Once you measure it, it is not quite as good as that, but it is better than basically everything else. So, yeah. That I don't know what Tom just did where his screen had turned entirely blue, but
my screen
Skype,
turned blue?
On Skype it did. So that was a fun little aside.
Sorry.
But that would be that. But that is assuming an enclosed rectangular room. Maybe what Scott is actually building is a 15 by 18 foot theater area within a larger open section of his basement or something like that, or it's a 15 by 18 foot room, but it has a permanent opening. Once you get into that, and it is not an enclosed rectangle anymore, then the predicted placements, they don't really apply anymore. It is much more difficult. We can predict that in just about any space, having the 2 subwoofers across the entire space, more or less as much as you can, So that might mean, let's say you've got a theater area, and then you've got a similarly sized kitchenette or something like that behind your theater area, and the whole thing is open to each other. Well, theoretically, the middle of the front wall of the theater and then the middle of the back wall of the kitchenette, those would be good. Not the middle of the back of the theater area anymore, the middle of the back of the entire space, or the middle of the left wall, but the entire length, right? The theater area and the kitchenette, and then the middle of the right wall, same thing. Theoretically, those will work best. But if this is a 15 by 18 enclosed rectangle, diagonally opposite corners will work pretty darn well.
Yeah. And we say it over and over again, but we just had somebody who had 2 subwoofers up front and 1 subwoofer at the back, and it ended up working. So it's not like it's impossible to make non-optimal placements work. We've actually had people in this podcast that just have 2 subwoofers at the front, and they've done measurements and they turned out pretty good.
Yeah.
And that's fine. So it's not like it's impossible to place them in the places in other locations and have them be still sound pretty good. Mm-hmm. But if you're going for like best practices, what we say is, either the midpoints of the walls, opposing corners, is if you can't make one of those work, you usually can make one of those work.
As in a dedicated room where you're building.
In a dedicated room, right. If it's rectangular. As soon as it's not rectangular, then things get a little bit more dicey.
Hard to predict.
So David has a similar question. He's planning out a dedicated basement home theater. Although he didn't provide dimensions or the shape of the room just yet, he too has initial plans for diagonally opposite corners, but wants to know how you go about determining the best locations before the room is built. If someone hires a custom installer, surely they are deciding on subwoofer locations during their planning stages and not waiting until the room is built to figure out via trial and error, right? So are they just taking their best guess or using sophisticated computer modeling or something? No one uses sophisticated computer modeling. They ask you, let's say you're working with a designer. The designer is going to either recommend where you put the subs or the speakers or all that stuff, or they're going to say, where would you like to put these subwoofers? And that'll be it.
Literally building the room from the ground up, they're going to build a rectangle. That is if they're a custom installer who's following the Harman research, and not all of them are.
Which is not. I would suggest not many of them are, because they're building beautiful rooms that have that
happen to have some
no
speakers in
no
them.
Visible speakers,
right?
No visible subwoofers, a massive screen, and a ton of chairs in it, and no room treatments whatsoever. So that's what a lot of them do.
You do have like following best practices. Anthony Grimani out there, who's a very popular and very well-known custom installer, and he is following that. He's following the Harman research, and he's constructing his rooms that way, and he's doing his best to inform the rest of the CEDIA community that this is what the research says, and it's backed up by the real-world results once you experiment with it and see what the results are. So if you're building from scratch, you'll build an enclosed rectangular room, and then it becomes much more predictable. But for the installers who care and want uniform base at all the seats, and the room is not an enclosed rectangle and not as predictable, they will install at a minimum 3 subwoofers, probably 4 subwoofers.
Yeah.
They will have them spread out around the room, and then after everything is installed, there will need to be sound field management tuning. You can't get away from it. But if you have installed 3 or 4 subwoofers that are spread out around the room, you give yourself an excellent shot at sound field management tuning working.
You can brute force it, basically.
You can brute force it with a Synthesis Arco system from JBL, or manually. You can do it manually, just brute force manually do it. We have the multi-sub optimizer software. You can do it with a Trinov system. You can do it now with Dirac Live bass management, right? There are multiple systems now that allow you to brute force it, but they really can only do their best job with 3 or 4 subwoofers. So it's one of the two things. How would we go about predicting how to do it? Well, either we build the predictable room, which is a rectangle. Thankfully, it's not some crazy shape that no contractor would be able to wrap their head around.
Enter the octagon.
That's
for
right.
Best sound.
We're just building a rectangle, and any contractor should be able to handle that in the blueprint. But if we're not able to do that, if we're going into an existing room, or you want a different shape, or you want permanent openings to other part of the house, then you're going to install more than 2 subwoofers. That's really the way we're going to come at it.
I've actually talked to custom installers before, and a lot of times they're brought into a room and said, I want home theater in this room, and they look at it and they're like, okay, well, let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
And I actually, it was a long time ago. I don't know if I read this or it was from talking with this guy, because I don't remember, but it was like an octagon. It was a very, and he's like, I had no idea what it was going to sound like when I put all this stuff in here. He was like, I had no clue, man, and it ended up sounding okay, but boy, I was scared because you're getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to install this custom home theater in here, and even though most people seem to be absolutely deaf, as far as I can tell, they are deaf. It can sound so bad that even those people who are not paying attention to the sound will notice how bad it is.
And there are simulation programs out there. Room EQ Wizard has a room simulator built right into it, but it's for an enclosed rectangle, because that is mathematically, you can calculate that without needing a supercomputer to do it.
I was going to say, you want to do this on the fly, you're going to need quantum computing to really step it up.
Yeah,
all right, because
full fluid dynamic analysis that either takes a while or you want a quantum computer to do it.
Yeah. All right, so for David's theater aesthetics and a very clean look with clear walkways is very important to him. So how are large subwoofers typically hidden in custom installations? He's open to having an acoustically transparent screen and stretched fabric or faux columns on the walls. But if the subwoofers are built into some kind of structure in order to hide them visually, do you just line that alcove with lots of insulation, or is there more to it? Yeah, so I mean, if you think about what would normally happen in a room, that, you'd put it in a corner, and there would be hard surfaces all around it, because you just can't put enough absorption behind it to do anything really. I mean, it'd be in the middle of the room at that point.
17-foot thick insulation, but
yes, it seems like that would be impractical. So, if you're looking for a really super clean look, I like the idea of getting the cylinder subs from SBS or something like that.
Oh yeah.
And then building like essentially, like you said, a column around them.
Yeah, faux column, sure.
And then one corner is the subwoofer, and the other corner it's floor to ceiling, insulation inside the faux columns. And you could do it in all four corners. You can put 4 subs there. You can put 2 subs, and then
it could be the middles of the 2 side walls. Yeah. Because I mean, he mentioned gigantic box subwoofers. I'm like, you can get a gigantic enclosure, but if it's a cylinder, the footprint is much smaller. It's much easier to put that inside a faux column. It's easier to put that behind a false wall that has your acoustically transparent screen up front. The small footprint of the cylinder subs is so handy.
And that's why you look at these, even those really big boxes from Monoprice and Power Sound Audio, they start going up eventually because they're just, they get too wide. You can't do anything with them. I remember the downward firing, dual 15, 13, whatever inch SVS drivers, and these massive boxes. I saw one, it was underneath a piano.
Yeah.
And it was bigger than the piano that was above it.
Yeah.
You're just like, it's like a grand piano with a subwoofer tucked underneath it, and it's poking out the one side. You're like, that is just too big. You can't do anything with that.
But I'm thinking, in David's dedicated theater he's building in his basement, maybe you have your false wall up front. You have a subwoofer that's hidden back there. Maybe it's right beneath your center speaker so that it's right in the middle of the front wall. And then maybe at the back wall, you just have a PC 4000 cylinder that is standing there. It isn't built into anything, but it's this lovely black cylinder. It's behind your back row of seats, and nobody ever really sees it because it's a black velour cylinder. It just visually doesn't stand out at all. Or you lay it down horizontally, because you can lay the cylinder subwoofers on their side, and now it's literally tucked behind a row of seats, and nobody ever sees it back there. So that can be very easy without doing anything tricky to the construction of your room.
I mean, and if you're really going for that super clean look, you can get built-in subs in walls and stuff like that. You can do that. They're not very good, and it's much harder to do, but it is theoretically possible. So that's another way of doing it. You don't need to do that, right? Don is still using a 65-inch Panasonic Plasma TV. He's got a Marantz SR7010 receiver, and he just picked up the new Apple TV 4K model. He's got a 7.2.4 speaker configuration and a dedicated, fully light-controlled home theater. He's been putting off buying a new TV, but now it seems like it's time. He'd like to go up in-screen size. He's thinking 77-inch OLED is the way to go, but which one exactly? He's a Costco member, and the new Sony A80J and the LG C1 are the same price. He's watched a ton of YouTube reviews, and it's just kind of making his head spin. It seems pretty clear that the LG is better for gaming, but he doesn't play games. So it's just movies and TV. So is there a strong reason to get the Sony over the LG or vice versa? I've heard now. I'm just gonna say this off. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of people complaining about LG OLEDs having issues. I think recently, but I think that's just it happened at like 3 or 4 different threads on Reddit all at the same time. So I don't put a ton of stock in it, but.
I mean, they did have a recent Dolby Vision glitch, which they repaired with a firmware update very quickly. So maybe that was it.
I actually think it was.
Honestly, for what Don just talked about, there's not a super strong reason to pick one over the other. I will say LG has been much more frequent with their firmware updates. Much more frequent with their firmware updates. If we do get a scenario where, I don't know, there's a new movie format that starts coming out with variable refresh rate or something like that. I don't know. It might. Well, LG is ready for it and Sony isn't. There's that. So, I mean, that really only applies to gaming right this second. But if you're buying this TV and keeping it a long time, hey, why not have the one that's ready for virtually anything that video might do in the next few coming years? So I think LG has a little advantage there. I think LG's frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping for HDR10 content is better. So picture quality-wise, I think that's one advantage that LG has. Ultimately, I would get an LG. I think it's the easier one to deal with. I think LG is more active in keeping their OLEDs right up to date. So yeah, I would probably go that way.
All right. Well, his Brandt's SR7010 receivers still work with all of the new 4K and Dolby Vision stuff. I mean, you're not gaming, so you don't have to worry about 4K 120.
That's right.
So, I mean, I don't really see why it won't. It should pass everything through just fine.
That one is fine. It's good for 4K 60. It's fine with Dolby Vision. I have the SR7010. It does seem to have trouble if you set it to like the maximum that HDMI 2.0 can do, which is 12-bit, right? 12-bit signals, 4K 60, Rec 2020, like to the absolute maximum. It does seem to have a problem with that. But if you limit it down to 420 chroma instead of full 444, you're basically fine.
That 444 chroma is just, you can make a mathematical argument for it. You know, I mean,
and in games where you might have colored text on a colored background, that's where 444 makes a difference. But for all the movies you're watching, all the TV shows you're watching, they're in 420 chroma anyway. So you happily have an Apple TV 4K. It lets you manually choose whether it's 420 or 444 that comes out of that. Choose 420 and you should not have any problems.
So he doesn't want to see any soap opera effect. So should he turn the motion smoothing as low as it? So he should turn the motion smoothing as low as it can go, right? Generally speaking, yes.
Generally speaking, yes.
But he's heard that when you go from a plasma to an OLED or LCD, you might notice some jerky motion and some stutter in the image if you don't apply at least a little bit of motion smoothing. So what's our take on that? And as far as getting all the settings correct, is either the Sony or LG easier on that front? So that's the big thing about going from plasmas to an LCD. You know, the LCD is not like plasmas and CRTs. They flash the image at you.
That's right. Really
quickly, and that black screen in between, your brain is real super good at saying, I'm not going to see that. I don't see that, and then just stringing the images together, because your eyes do the same thing. Your eyes take snapshots. You don't see. You're not actually seeing every single motion something makes, which is why there's an optical illusion. And I don't know if you guys ever remember this back in school, but when I was in school and I would look back at the clock to see if it was time to go out, it always seemed like the second hand took longer to make that first click than any of the clicks after it, which is because when you turn back, your brain is... because it doesn't see all the, it's taking all those snapshots. It tells you, okay, it kind of like rewrites history and tells you that where it is, and it seems to stay there longer for that reason. So your brain's really good at doing this with the LCDs, and they put an image up, and then they try as quickly as possible to switch to the next image.
Yeah, they call it sample and hold. So it's a sample image that is there until the next image, and then that comes
and that switch is sometimes visible, and that's that stutter that you're seeing, that you sometimes see. So
and there is like judder that is inherent to 24 frames per second film.
Sure.
It's not the television messing anything up. When you are showing a frame rate that low, there is a slight jerky stutter to it that is inherent to the film itself. And when you're watching it on an OLED or an LCD, people who are sensitive to seeing that, they will see that because it is that sample OLED. It's there for a 24th of a second, and then the next image shows up. There's no blanking in between. So is one of them easier to set up than another? Yes, the LG is easier to set up than the Sony because LG has filmmaker mode. And if you just put it into filmmaker mode, darn good job. It gives you the correct colors.
Walk away.
It turns off all of the motion smoothing and all of that stuff, and it's one picture preset, and that's really all you need to do on the LG. The Sony is not difficult. You put it into the custom picture mode, and then there's a couple of settings to tweak, but it's a couple of settings to tweak. Whereas the LG, you can really just put it into filmmaker mode and you're done. So it is easier on that front. If you are sensitive to the inherent judder of film of 24 frames per second motion, then yes, putting the true motion in LG's case or the motion flow in Sony's case to like one click above zero.
Right.
And this is where some people prefer Sony, because Sony's motion processing, their motion flow processing, if you keep it very low, if you put the de-juddering to like 1 and the smoothing to 2, then they do a good job of giving you minimal soap opera effect. I still see soap opera effect, though, even with those minimal settings. And so it's a choice of, do I want inherent film judder or do I want the tiniest bit of soap opera effect? Neither one is necessarily perfect or ideal, but overall, I still favor the LG. I think they're easier to set up. I think they support them more frequently than Sony does, and they are ready for all the gaming features, which maybe we'll get a movie format that uses variable refresh rate or something. So,
hardcore Henry 2.
Right.
Henry? I can't remember. Anyways. So if he's getting a new 4K Dolby Vision TV, it's time to get an Ultra HD Blu-ray player, too. We've said to go with Panasonic, right? Which is the good one? Well, the 420 is the cheaper one, but it doesn't have Dolby Vision. Is that right?
Is correct.
Still?
That is correct.
So you're going to have to go, I think, with, is it the 820?
Yeah, the UB820 has all the things. It has Dolby Vision. It has HDR10 Plus as well, as though neither Sony nor LG supports HDR10 Plus. But if you ended up with a Vizio OLED, then you could do all four, in fact. There's HLG as well. But yeah, the UB820, if you're willing to spend the money on it, you can very often find it for $400 instead of $500, because it's quite frequently on sale for $400. And if you just want all the stuff and the nice build quality and the quiet disc spinner, then you can justify a UB820.
Trevor, a team at, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's like Malmö, because it's Swedish. And it's got the umlauts over the O.
I don't know what that is. Malmo. It looks like Malmo with the end. Bunny ears on the O. Malmo. Anyways, it's a university in Sweden has created the revolutionary sound-absorbing screw, or sound screw for short. I just sent. That's the link I just sent. I sent you.
Oh, okay.
Somebody sent it to us. That's what my screen turned blue. Okay. Somebody sent it to us on Facebook, and I went and grabbed it and thought, that looks interesting.
It's here.
Drywall is secured to the head of the screw. Then there's a spring-loaded section a few millimeters deep. Then a regular wood screw that goes into the stud. So the drywall is separated and decoupled from the stud by the spring section. In lab testing, they say it reduced sound transmission by 9 dB for walls, and was even more effective for a ceiling because it was hanging down. Instead
of perpendicular to the screw, it was
gravity. So they are available to purchase in Sweden from Akustos with a K. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit throwing me. And the university team is working on licensing their invention in North America. They say the initial price is high for a screw, but cheap compared to other types of sound isolation system. And the cost will decrease with production volume. So what do we think? So this thing is like I said, I just sent the link to Rob because it's a funky looking thing. It looks very interesting. Now, do I think that, I'm sure it works?
It should. There's
I see no reason
physics or mechanical reason why it shouldn't.
It decouples, but that's right. Again, if you decouple the wall, but you don't decouple the ceiling, and then you tape the ceiling or you mud the ceiling into the wall, then you're recoupled again. So you have to do it to all the surfaces, and that's a lot of screws.
Yes.
I think it's great. I think this would be great. Again, if you're at the point where you're putting up drywall, though, you've got a lot of options that maybe work better than this, but it is an option. So more options is better than fewer options. That's what I say.
Absolutely. And when it comes down to saving as much physical space as you possibly can,
right,
almost all other decoupling systems require more room lost than this. This is only a few millimeters that you're losing in terms of square footage, because the drywall is a little bit in from the studs. As far as installation, because to me that's the big question, labor cost. Does this take longer to install? If this installs faster, and there's every reason to think that it might, although they did mention that there was you drill the drywall first. And I'm like, oh, gosh, if you have to drill the drywall for every place that a screw is installed, that is going to increase the time.
By a factor. I mean, it's not going to be... That's a lot, because they usually just...
usually they nail, right? Usually drywall is nailed.
Is it?
In fast installations, they nail drywall because it's faster. That's, if you're getting a townhouse or something like that, it's all nailed.
Oh, now that I think about it, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
When you're DIYing it, you usually use screws because that's better. It's the more secure factor. You're not going to pop a drywall nail, but you hear about popping drywall nails all the time because a lot of drywall is nailed. So compared to that, it's definitely going to take longer. That means labor cost goes up. That has to be factored in. Something like IsoStore, they have it's basically like a rubberized standoff. So you screw a little block of wood into the regular stud, then it has a rubberized standoff, and you screw the drywall right into that. So even though those cost more per piece, they might actually be faster to install because you only need a couple of screws per, and then actually installing the drywall is no different than installing regular drywall. If that takes less time, that really needs to be factored in. So there's multiple things, but ultimately, if they can mass produce these at a super cheap price and they work and they save floor space, then ultimately I'm all for it regardless, but there's multiple things to consider.
Right, I agree with you. The pre-drilling I think is maybe the deal breaker there. Because,
if it needs to be, If they can do self-tapping, though, then that could make it faster, and then it would be even better.
Right, yeah. Let me see what time it is. I have a hard out, so I'm going to be...
When?
At some point, I'm going to call it. 1 at the, I think, latest.
Oh, goodness.
I'm gonna go,
so we only got less than half an hour. I might carry on a few, because we got quite a few questions on the list.
We're already halfway through, so we're fine.
Barely.
John. For his front, left, and right speakers, John uses a pair of Bic Acoustic PL89 towers. They're very efficient, 898 dB, 1 watt, 1 meter, with a horn-loaded tweeter and dual 8-inch woofers. He came across some reviews that say they're overly bright in the treble, and he has to agree they are. He's working on making his DIY absorption panels for his roughly 15 by 40 foot room, with the theater area taking up the front half. So it's 15 by 20 in the area that he's in. And he's using Outlaw's Pre-Pro. So in terms of taming his treble brightness, what should he do? Should he consider a physical modification to the speaker? He's been happy with the results of plugging the port to reduce distortion in the bass at very high volume levels. So could he maybe stuff the horn with gauze to reduce the tweeter harshness? Or should something else be done instead? Yeah, you're not going to like what I'm about to say. So, this, horns in general have the reputation for being bright. I mean, that being harsh. That is just something that happens. I could see how you could come to the conclusion that you might want to put some gauze or something in there. I don't think that's going to make a big difference.
There is absolutely zero recommendation to do that. I would definitely not do that.
So, really the solution to the problem is to either apply some sort of roll-off at the very top end and hope that you hit the frequency that is offending you, or buy new speakers. these are $600 a pop, so they're not exactly the cheapest speaker in the world.
Nor the most expensive for towers, that's for sure.
For towers, right.
But he's got the Outlaw Pre-Pro, so it does have an equalizer built right into it, so you can definitely go with EQ. Definitely don't go modifying your speakers with gauze and the tweeter horns before you have put up your DIY acoustic treatments.
Right.
Because your DIY acoustic treatments might help on this front. And then you can experiment with toe-in. Because if you have these things pointed straight at your face, you're going to hear more of that treble relative to the other frequencies versus if you have the speakers themselves pointing straight forward so that they are off axis, or maybe you even make them wall-eyed a little bit. You're allowed to do that. You are allowed to do interesting things with toe-in, and if you are really having offending high frequencies, if you have your speakers pointed straight forward or even a little bit wall-eyed, you can reduce that because now your ear is even more off-axis to the most directional sounds, which is that high treble. So there's lots you can do. I would under no circumstances stuff the horn with gauze.
No. Toe-in in particular is something that, like what Rob said, first put up your treatments and see what that does. But then, also, then really play with that toe-in because if you do, and I see so many people with their towers, basically smooshed in against their TV and then towed in so it's facing directly at them.
Yeah. And then after that, you have
most speakers are not meant to be oriented in that way. They are not meant to be oriented directly at you unless they're electrostats. They are not meant to be directed because the off-axis response is where they think most people will be sitting. No, there's only one spot or two spots in a room where you can have the speakers pointed directly at where you're sitting, whereas there's entire areas of the room that'll be slightly off-axis to that tweeter. So they are really most speakers are meant to be listened to off-axis slightly, at the very least.
3 things to do before any of this idea of physically modifying the speakers.
Don't physically
don't do
the physical modification is to sell them and buy different ones. Okay, that's the physical modification. Don't put gauze in nothing. John has a bit of an elaborate headphone setup. He uses a Monoprice Monolith M-215 planar magnetic headphones with XLR connections. They are powered by the Magnus balanced headphone amplifier, spelled SCHIIT. YouTube. Don't demonify us. I mean, not that we care. And for digital sources, he runs those through the Grace Design balanced DAC from Drop. I don't know what any of this stuff is, and I don't care. So, as we can tell, he's gone for balanced signal and XLR connections the whole way through. Now he's wondering if adding an equalizer in between the DAC and his amp might mess everything up. He's eyeing the PV 215 graphic EQ because it's balanced and has XLR connections, and he wants something he can adjust by hand, not a software-based EQ. What do we think?
I would not use a graphic EQ. That is, I just wouldn't use a graphic EQ anymore.
So graphic EQs, that they have the sliders, right? Is that the deal?
Sliders,
they have
that's right.
The
you
sliders,
cannot choose what frequency they impact, what they're centered on. You cannot choose the width of the frequencies to either side of that center frequency that get affected. It is a slider EQ. You get 15 bands, 2 channels of it, hence the 215. And I just would not use a graphic EQ today.
Right. I mean, they are... See, I said sure, and I'm sticking with it because I think you want to buy it, and I don't think that there's anything that's going to stop you from doing that.
I mean, the thing is,
I'm going to give you my blessing because I think that that's what you're looking for, and that's fine. I agree with Rob. Anything that's so limited in its functionality when there is options out there that are not so limited. Now, you are limiting yourself. You have already done that. You have decided that you're going to go all balanced, all XLR, all this other stuff that sonically probably makes if it's a difference, it's not audible, in my opinion. Now, I haven't heard your setup. I haven't heard your setup compared to some other setup. I would be surprised if it would be audible.
But he doesn't want a mini DSP because mini DSP has stopped selling their balanced models. They don't bother with them anymore because they're really not necessary. But they don't have them anymore, and that would be he would have to set up the EQ in software and then load it to the mini DSP. He can't just reach over to the mini DSP and turn some knobs and adjust it on the fly by hand. So I would I would go for a parametric EQ. There are still some manual turn the knobs parametric EQ. So that's where there's going to be a knob to choose the center frequency. There's going to be a knob to choose the Q, which is to the above and below that center frequency, how much it's impacted, the width of what's being applied. And then the third knob, which is the boost or the cut to that range of frequencies. I would be okay with a manual parametric EQ, but they are much more expensive than they used to be because there's only sort of specialty brands that are still making them because everybody's kind of moved over to mini DSP as the inexpensive solution for equalizing signals. So I see where he's coming from, because if he wants a manual EQ that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, well, you end up with like this PV model that is a graphic EQ because that is less expensive. I just don't think it's really worth your money to do that. I would either save up and get what you really want, which is a manual parametric equalizer. They do still exist. They're just more expensive. Or I would, consider a mini DSP that's going to be getting XLR to RCA connections in there, which honestly doesn't matter, but whether you'll be willing to do that after the effort he went to keep everything XLR, I don't know. But yeah, that I wouldn't recommend getting a graphic EQ.
So since he's using Outlaw's 976 Pre-Pro in his home theater, all of his amplification has to be external. He's got Crown Pro amps to power his subs. But what's the best option for his speakers? Should he get more Crown Pro amps? The XLS 1002 specifically, which is 2 channels of Class D and delivers 215 watts into 8 ohms. Or should he get the Outlaw Model 2200 monoblocks? I'm not going to tell you to get the Outlaws, but... So we've talked about this before in this podcast, and I think I wrote an article about it, but I can't remember if I ever published it. The problem with getting pro amplification with in a home theater, there's a lot of issues that arise.
Potentially,
potentially fans, which often happen,
which they do have.
Which means you're adding noise to your theater, no matter what. There is often the problem that they are built not as linear as the home theater gear.
They're linear for a more specific range of impedances to which they're supposed to be attached. So some of them are really well suited for low impedance only. And then if you have a very steep rising impedance somewhere, they become nonlinear at that point. Or they're specifically good for a 16 ohm plus impedance, but then if it dips, they become it's like more limited, and they're expecting that a pro will understand the specs and attach it to speakers that are applicable.
And if you look at the specs of if you go to the Crown, the website, and you start looking at their amps, they have charts of things, and you're like, what does any of this mean?
Yeah, why do they have so many that appear so similar in the most basic specs? Yeah.
Right. It's very easy to look at at pro amps and say, I am getting an amazing amount of power for my dollar. If you just look at the price per power ratio, you're getting absolutely hooked up. But there's so much more that goes into it with the pro amps. And if you really go to Crown and you're like, okay, I'm gonna get a pro amp, and I'm gonna get one that's gonna be that's going to be more like a home theater. It's not going to have a fan. I'm going to make sure that it's going to be linear at all the impedances that I'm worried about. So it's going to have different tolerances, higher tolerances, and then next thing you know, you're basically paying the same amount that you would have paid for getting an actual home theater branded or designed amplifier. So can you do this? Yes.
Sure.
Would I do this? Absolutely not. I would not.
Sound will absolutely come out. It's not that you won't get any sound.
Yes.
The big one to me is with these 2 specific amps that he mentioned, the Crown amp has a much lower signal to noise ratio. And the reason that makes sense is because they are designed to be attached to 2 ohm public address PA speakers, where what you need are gobs and gobs of watts, and whether there's a hiss that comes out of the tweeter when you stand right next to it is immaterial. It doesn't matter. But so
the Crown has higher. You said lower signal to noise ratio.
Well, it has lower signal to noise ratio. Yeah, there's more noise, but the idea is you can crank it crazy loud, and that's all you care about is crazy loud, and they can do that. But the thing is, you're using at the moment these big acoustic speakers that are incredibly sensitive. Even if you want to play them really loud, you need low watts. What you need is a very high signal to noise ratio. You don't want to hear a hiss coming from the tweeter, and the vast majority of the time, you're using well below 10 watts. You honestly are, even at really high output levels with those big speakers that you're using. So you want the good signal to noise ratio. Honestly, I wouldn't even necessarily point you to the Outlaw Model 2200. You know, if you really want to nail this for what you're doing, I would point you to like a Monoprice Monolith that has...
Which is an ATI amp, basically.
Yeah, which has like the best signal to noise ratio that is kind of available to, you know, at consumer prices. But if it's going to be one of these two, I would get the Outlaw Model 2200 all day long.
Okay. Paul has a 77-inch LG CX OLED. He was using the built-in streaming apps, and he was seeing horrendous judder with a horrible jerky motion during slow panning shots that was giving him a headache. So after listening to us, he bought an Apple TV 4K and turned on the match frame rate setting. To him, the difference is incredible, and now panning shots look buttery smooth. So thanks to us for that insight. You're welcome. I don't remember talking about that, but let's go on. His gear is at the back of his room, and his TV's at the front, so he ran a 35-foot HDMI cable up through the attic and back down. It's from the brand Capshi, I'm going to say.
Yeah, that's what it is.
And it says it is high-speed HDMI 2.1 with 8 gigabits.
2.0.
Bandwidth, 2.0, what did I say?
2.1.
2.0.
But it's 2.0.
2.0.
18 gigabits.
2.0, sorry. It was working perfectly fine for his Blu-ray player, but the signal from his Apple TV 4K didn't make it. So he tried it with the Apple TV plugged into his AV receiver, and with the Apple TV just plugged straight into that 35-foot HDMI cable, but no dice. He had to plug the Apple TV directly into his TV at the front of his room. That's too many times saying TV in a short period of time. So is that a bad thing? Could he leave things the way they are and just rely on ARC or eARC? Or does he need to bite the bullet and replace that 35-foot HDMI cable in his attic? Let me see. Where I completely lost the plot on this one. 77-inch OLED.
Mm-hmm. Apple TV 4K.
Apple TV didn't say what receiver he has.
Didn't mention what receiver he has. Yeah, so I don't know if your receiver has eARC or not. Yeah, I don't know.
If you have eARC, you should be able to do this without much issue, I would think, unless LG is the one that doesn't do DTSX. Is LG the one that doesn't do DTSX?
That's correct. They don't do DTS of any kind.
But that shouldn't be a problem.
Shouldn't be a problem with
Apple TV 4K, Apple TV 4K, because it's going to be all Dolby anyways.
Apple is all Dolby anyways. So the question is, eARC, do you actually have eARC? Because if you have an older AV receiver that just has HDMI ARC, audio return channel, not enhanced audio return channel, right? Then you are going to be limited to Dolby Digital 5.1. In your case, Dolby Digital 5.1 or 2-channel stereo.
Full stop.
In some cases, Dolby Digital Plus. In some cases, that'll work, but not necessarily all the time. It's a little bit questionable. What should work is, we alluded to this earlier with someone else's question, is the Apple TV lets you set it to either 444 chroma output or 420. And I'll bet you, if you set that down to 420, it makes it through. That reduces the amount of necessary bandwidth quite a bit, and I'll bet that makes it. Again, like I mentioned before with my own Marantz SR7010, if I leave it at 444, the receiver struggles to send it through. Not the HDMI cable. The HDMI cable might be fine, although he said he connected it straight to the cable to the Apple TV 4K without the receiver in the signal chain at all, and it still struggled. So the HDMI cable he mentioned, it's not high-speed premium certified. It just says it has 18 gigabits a second. We don't know that it actually does. It might only be 10.2. But even so, if you set the Apple TV to 420, I'll bet it makes it through. So that's an easy thing to try because that's a setting. If you do rely on ARC or eARC, we talked about this last week, which is you can't really see the info very easily. You kind of have to just rely on what listening modes are available to you in order to determine what signals are making it through. And if you do have just regular ARC and not eARC, then sometimes the television ends up doing all the decoding, and then it like re-encodes it before sending it out of ARC, and sometimes you end up with lip sync and latency issues because of that. So it is kind of safer and easier and nicer if you can plug your source into the AV receiver. Then you can see all the info, you can be sure what signals are coming in and going out, and I think if you set the Apple TV 4K to 420 chroma, it will work.
Michael has a PS5, and that's his only Ultra HD Blu-ray player. It does not support Dolby Vision, only HDR10.
Yes.
He's got several discs that either have Dolby Vision or HDR10, and his TV supports Dolby Vision. So he's seen that via Netflix and Vudu using his TV's built-in apps. And so whatever.
He's seen Dolby Vision that way.
He's seen it, yeah. It looks great, but would discs look even better if they were Dolby Vision? Is it worth spending upwards of $500 on a standalone Ultra HD Blu-ray player just to get Dolby Vision when he already has a PS5? He's feeling torn. What would we do? Everything I've read, everything I've seen, I mean, it's just that Dolby requires you to use all their stuff and to get all their training and stuff. So Dolby Vision ends up looking better because of it.
Well, I mean, it's ultimately the less capable your television, right? The dimmer your TV, the bigger the visible difference Dolby Vision makes. That's kind of the way it works out. If you've got one of the entry level, or not even entry, like the mid level, like say the M series Vizio or something, which is a pretty darn good TV. It's a really good value, but it can't get above 500 nits. It struggles to even get to 500 nits. You play that with Dolby Vision and you see more detail than if you play HDR10. That is just cut and dry. You see more detail. But if you have a pretty darn capable television, then the differences become really, really small. And furthermore, if you have a television that has frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, I mean, there's no need for Dolby Vision at that point. So this really depends on what TV do you have, Michael. That's what it is. Because if you've got an OLED, an LG OLED that has its own dynamic frame-by-frame tone mapping, I wouldn't worry about Dolby Vision at all. I don't. I actually, back up most of my discs and play them through Plex, and I haven't done, there is a way to do Dolby Vision now. I haven't bothered with that. It's more hassle than it's worth to me. I just have HDR10 in all of my backups, and I'm perfectly happy with that, with the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. Or if you have a display, a Samsung, that gets up to 1500 nits on its own, you don't really need Dolby Vision. It's going to show you everything that's there without tone mapping it. So it largely depends on your television.
Gurinder and Billy. What time is it? I got 9 minutes.
Yeah.
Gurinder heard... Excuse me again. Got the Rona. Gurinder heard Billy's question last episode asking if he should buy a JVC projector right now to replace his Sony VW695. Billy's main reason is that he wanted better HDR performance. So Gurinder was wondering. He's seen the forum threads with people talking about SXRD optical block degradation in Sony projectors. But that was a while ago. Did that continue to be an issue, or did Sony fix it in newer models? Could that be the reason why Billy isn't very happy with his projector? I don't know. I've never heard of this.
So what Billy described in terms of what he was hoping to improve in the way of his picture is in no way what is described when you have this SXRD, that's the Sony Crystal Reflective Display. This optical block degradation, which is basically over time, those SXRD panels, they work like LCD, except that it's a reflective display. So the light goes in, it reflects off something behind the liquid crystal layer and comes back out again. So it goes through the liquid crystal layer twice. And Sony was having an issue where over time, the liquid crystals weren't twisting as much as they should when the voltage is applied. So they started losing contrast and they started losing color accuracy. And that is not what Billy was describing. In Billy's case, he's like, some of my movies look perfectly fine. It's just some content. It's dimmer in HDR than I would like it to be. It essentially comes down to the tone mapping. So he's not having an issue where his black level jumped after 1,000 hours of use and his colors went all wonky. That's not what he's having. That's what goes wrong with the degradation of the panels. Sony has said in recent years that they've improved on that front. It was a known issue. It really affected their cinema projectors to quite a large degree, where they're having to replace those under warranty. So they have worked on it. Whether they've been successful, I don't really know, but that was definitely not Billy's issue.
Okay. Billy wrote back to say that we were correct when we speculated that he might be frustrated if he bought a JVC projector right now, only to have them announce new models in a few months. So he will wait. But in the meantime, he does have a Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player, and HDR movies do look good when he's using it. It's when he uses his Apple TV 4K that HDR looks too dim with several movies. So we said he could just adjust the settings on the Sony to compensate, but gamma can only be adjusted in SDR mode. HDR mode, the gamma setting, isn't available. So are there any specifics on how he can adjust his HDR mode to look brighter. I guess.
Yes,
Probably.
indeed. Yeah. So I went to Projector Reviews, which, if you just look up their VW695 review, they didn't put in the calibration settings there. But you can very much largely apply the general settings of basically any of the 4K Sony projectors to each other, because they all work on the same system. So borrowing from one of the other models, we're going to see similar tables to what we showed before. But their recommendation basically was, if you sort of want a super accurate HDR mode and then a one that you've manually brightened, just use 2 different picture modes so that you have the ability to have them saved and switch back and forth. So there's Cinema Film 1 and Cinema Film 2. And Billy sent in some pictures of what he had done to Cinema Film 1, and it was, basically the suggestions for the most accurate mode. But they have these suggestions for switch over to Cinema Film 2, start with that as your starting point, and then enter some different values. And he's absolutely right. Gamma is not an available setting under HDR, and I mentioned that you can change the gamma, but they get around that by raising the contrast, raising the brightness, setting the contrast enhancer to a higher level. And that's one of the big ones, is the contrast enhancer, which does tend to raise your black levels a bit. But the whole idea is, if everything looks too dim, you're just raising everything up. But the big one is that color correction. If you're in the Cinema Film 2 mode, turning color correction on actually doesn't ruin your color accuracy, and it boosts light output overall. And that is something Billy definitely had not touched, was the color correction setting, just turning it on. There's nothing else to do there, just turning it on. So there are some things you can do to boost the brightness, and you wouldn't want them for the most accurate mode. So when he's going back to his Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player, he'd go back to Cinema Film 1. But he can input all of those settings where a bunch of things are boosted in Cinema Film 2 and give himself a brighter HDR mode.
Okay. I'm looking at this next question. Yeah. So back to Gurinder. He doesn't have any experience with it. What about using MadVR video processing? He's read about the huge differences it can make, especially for projector users. Any insights? Any device that promises that it can universally make everything better across the board is lying. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a video processor.
It's a video. This is not like, it's like they're not the first ones to come out with these products, and they won't be the last ones.
And video processors aren't snake oil. They're things video processors do. Yeah,
they do things, and but then again, I don't know. It's $7,000.
Well, for their one that they're selling, which it's just a PC. They built a PC, they installed MadVR, and then what makes it so expensive is they did a ton of programming to give it a somewhat user-friendly interface, because regular MadVR, like, you won't watch any movies. That's what's going to happen. You will spend all of your time adjusting MadVR for one movie, and then when it comes time to watch another movie, you'll have to go back to AVS Forum and spend another few hours looking it up and adjusting it for movie number 2. That's what's going to happen. That's what the people who are into MadVR end up doing. Like, they're just on the forum all day long, because they don't actually watch movies. They adjust their hardware and their software all day long. The reason people love it is you can use it with Kodi. That's by and large where people are using it. You can use it with a J-River media player as well. So it's home theater PC crowd. It's Kodi users. They're doing it in their PC. It is hours and hours of setup, and then people get into like adjusting the frame-by-frame tone mapping, because it gives you this incredibly granular control. And for the people who that's what they love, they don't like watching movies. They like adjusting settings, and it's great for them. But if you actually want to watch movies, I'm not a huge fan of going into it. I would much rather have a projector that does frame-by-frame tone mapping, which is, brings us back to the JVCs and ultimately where he's probably going to end up. So I wouldn't spend $7,000 on their own, which is the MadVR Envy. I definitely wouldn't do that, because you can buy a whole new projector for that comes with frame-by-frame tone mapping. And, if you want to build a home theater PC and fiddle with it for hours because that's what you love doing, more power to you. I think the people who love that stuff are already doing so.
How much is the software, though? I'm trying to figure out how much the software. So the software is free, but you could buy a $7,000 computer with the software.
Because using it is, you got to pay yourself $7,000.
Yeah. So yeah, there have been video processors and I have seen them, and they all do some level of good. They all can help. And especially with projectors, because projectors in particular, their bulbs dim over time. It would be good, to be able to adjust them on the fly as you go. But like Rob said, you're just not going to do it. You're not going to do it because you want to be able to actually watch the movie every once in a while.
It's a bit like the base EQ thing, right? Like I see tremendous value in that base EQ thing. I would never go to the extent that the people on the forum who are doing it movie by movie, I would never adjust my mini DSP movie by movie. I would consider setting up one generic 12 decibel per octave filter, one generic 24 decibel per octave filter, because the mini DSP has presets and you can change that with a button press, right? So I would consider something like that. I would never do it movie by movie. No way, no how. But there are people, that's what they love to do. And more power to them, but it's not something I would recommend to the majority of people. Yeah. So, similar there. So you gotta go.
I gotta go. Are you gonna keep going, really? Because there's only a couple of there's only three questions left.
There's 4 more questions. 2 of them are long. I won't do the 2 long ones. I think I'll do the 2 short ones because they're very short and easy to answer. So I'll do those, and then we've put a nice, lovely dent into it. And everybody say thank you to Tom, and we'll see you again next week.
See you next week.
Alrighty, so let's see. I should switch myself over so that we are seeing me instead of a blank Skype screen on the other side of me. And there goes Tom. So, yes, let's see. What I will do is I will mention Jack and down at the bottom, Brett. You two gentlemen, Tom and I will answer your questions next week. They're a little bit longer and a little bit more involved, and it would be really nice to have both of our inputs. So, sorry that we didn't get to you this week, but we will get to you first up next week. I will answer J.A.'s question right now because it's a pretty simple one. It's actually revisiting a little bit of something that was mentioned many, many episodes ago and was difficult to find, but this is one I don't mind revisiting because it's a good one to have in hand. So Jay says, unbeknownst to him, it turns out his wife really loves old Atari games. He did not know this about her, but she went and got a retro Atari game console, but there is a problem, which is that it only has composite video output, the yellow RCA plug, and then red and white RCA stereo analog audio. That's all it has for outputs. And their TV that they have in the bedroom where they're going to be hooking up this retro console only has HDMI inputs. And this is a common thing that is happening now. So it turns out that just taking an old interlaced low resolution composite video signal and converting it to 1080p HDMI is not super simple. Jay has discovered this. So he asks, what is a solid converter option that actually works, keeps the games playable with, not horrendous latency and not horrendous scan lines or weird overlapping images and stuff, which can happen with just super cheap composite to HDMI converters that don't do any type of processing. A big bonus to him would be if it also offers component video conversion, because he has an original Xbox and has the component video cables for it, and he was thinking, hey, that's the best signal I can get out of an original Xbox, and it'd be kind of neat if we could do that. So the company to go to for these things is RetroTink. Retro Tink. They have a number. They're not like super duper cheap, but no latency. They process the video properly, so they line double to turn it into progressive scan. They have some models that actually do full scaling. Those are more expensive, but if what you really just need is the composite video and the stereo analog audio and turning that into a very usable latency-free HDMI signal, I would suggest the 2X Mini. That is $80. That is sort of their least expensive option. And if you want something that does have component video input, then they have the 2X Pro. So looking first at the 2X Mini, if we're looking at the diagrams that I'm showing on YouTube, very simple. It actually comes with a cable that you can connect to any of the old Nintendo systems that gives you an S video output, but that isn't really applicable in the case with this Atari system. So you just be using the composite, plug that in there. It's USB power, so if your television has a USB port, that'll power it just fine. And then HDMI out to the television does a great job on there. If you do go with the RetroTink 2X Pro, that gives you component video input. The green input of the component video doubles as a composite input. So you would be switching back and forth if you're switching between systems, but you would just have to unplug the green component cable and plug in the yellow composite video cable, and that'll work just fine. It does have S-video input on the side as well. So the 2X Mini goes for $80 and the 2X Pro goes for $130. So these aren't super cheap, but as you discovered, just the bare bones composite to HDMI adapters that are like $30-$40, they don't really work well for games. You get an image, but either they have horrible latency or the image is tearing all over the place and it really doesn't work very well. So that's that one. Last question I will answer for this week is from Infinite Gary. Everybody take a shot. There's a question from Infinite Gary on this episode. Gary has seen a lot of YouTube home theater tours where they clearly don't pay any attention to the room's acoustics. It's bare, hard, reflective walls, and they haven't put up any acoustic treatments. When he's watching those videos, you can plainly hear how reverberant the room is when they're just talking to the camera, and you can hear their voice echoing around their own room. Well, he recently saw one, he didn't send me the link, so I don't know the specifics, but he saw one where they took some time to point out the room treatments that had been installed, and then while they're standing in front of the projection screen talking about the rest of the system, it still sounded reverberant. So, Gary is wondering, is it a case where if the microphone is several feet away, it's just the microphone that's built into the camera or built into the phone that you're using to shoot your video, is it just always going to sound reverberant? It's not the room's fault. It's just the microphone being far away and the way that the camera microphone or the phone microphone picks it up. Is that just always inherently going to sound reverberant? Or is the sound of their voices in the video accurate and they simply need way more or way better room treatments than what they talked about and installed? So like I say, I didn't see the video. Gary didn't provide the link. I don't know the specifics of exactly what is going on. But if you are in a well-treated room and you're recording the video on your phone camera, just using the mic that's built in, it doesn't sound reverberant. It's not inherent to the microphone of the camera or of the phone that's being used to make the recording. That isn't the case. If you were hearing reverberation in their voices, then their room is reverberating. That's what's going on. I don't know what kind of treatments they put up. If they just put up the egg crate foam, then that's doing nothing. It's doing nothing, and it wouldn't surprise me for the room to still sound reverberant. Some of it might have been them standing in front of a non-acoustically transparent projection screen. So you might have literally just been hearing the reflection of the sound. If they're standing right in front of the screen and the camera's right there, it might be that reflection that you're getting the reverberation. It might be the big, flat, non-acoustically transparent screen, the solid screen that was behind them. It could be that. It also might be that they did some of the recording before the room treatments were installed. We don't know the order in which things were recorded and shown to us. We only have one camera angle. We don't necessarily know what's going on in the rest of the room. So there's multiple reasons why the room rights still sound reverberant, even if it was properly acoustically treated. It might be the screen. It might be the time when it was recorded and the acoustic treatments weren't up yet. Or it is entirely possible that they got some ineffective acoustic treatments. If they're 1-inch thick foam, there's plenty of foam treatments that do next to nothing. And you can have a pile of them and your room is still going to reverberate, which is why they are a bad deal. And you want to get good, proper, thick, insulation-based acoustic treatments. So, maybe their room was treated with nothing but diffusion and they have no absorption in there whatsoever. And that is still going to sound reverberant too. So it's not inherent to the microphone they were using. That's an accurate, well, not necessarily accurate, but representative representation of what it would be like to be hearing things in their room. Okay, so as mentioned, Brett and going up a ways, Jack, you will be on the list for next week coming up first. So let us scroll back up to the top there so that I can thank our listeners of the week. That includes Brett, a different Brett, spelled differently, I think. I don't know. Maybe it is the same Brett, and Tom and I just spelled it differently. Who knows what's going on? But if the spelling is an indication that's a different Brett who donated via PayPal by coming to avrant.com and clicking on the support AVRant cup of coffee image over on the right-hand side of the desktop version of avrant.com, took him to PayPal, and he gave us a donation. So thank you very much, Brett. And over at patreon.com/avrant podcast, we have 126 patrons who have signed up to automatically monthly donate at least $1 a month, and that is very nice of them. So thank you to all of our 126 patrons. Also want to give a thanks to Jack, Jay, Don, Michael's dad, apparently, since Michael is making sure he watches our YouTube videos, Gurinder, Brett, this is the one with the question down below, according to the spelling, and Sean. They all sent in notes of encouragement and gratitude that Tom and I are keeping this podcast going through thick and thin and scheduling and storms and pandemics and all kinds of other things that might have made a podcast go away, but we haven't. We've stuck it out, and they are grateful, and we are grateful that they are writing into us and letting us know that they're listening. We're super grateful to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. If you do want to get your question onto the podcast, please email it to us. question@avrant.com is the email address to use, and that is where to send your questions if you want them answered by Tom and Rob on AVRant. So on behalf of Tom Andry, this has been AVRant. I am Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.